So in this video with Keith from Monetary Metals, he explains why earning interest on gold and silver is very important. And as you can see from the video, Keith is a brilliant guy. So I think this would make sense for somebody that has a large portion of their net worth in gold and silver and don't need that gold and silver for a year, that you're able to do a gold lease to be able to earn interest on your metals. And let's just say you're traveling the world and you don't want to pay storage fees. I think that also makes sense for someone like that as well. Monetary metals would also work well for someone that has a large bank balance that wants to earn interest on their capital. So certain examples, monetary metals is going to be the perfect solution and fit for you. All right, so I just wanted to see if you could give a brief intro into what monetary metals is.
So we call ourselves a different kind of gold company, and our remit is to unlock the productivity of gold. And what do we mean by that? Most gold companies, it's about sell the gold to the customer and hopefully the price goes up. And our idea is to pay interest on the gold. So instead of thinking about how much more dollars your gold is worth if you sell it, our clients are thinking about how much more gold they're getting by investing it to some productive purpose.
Okay, well, I'm gonna ask some questions here. Why would anyone want to earn interest on gold and silver?
I think earning interest is a universal human need. You know, you work for X number of years, then you're retired. Then at some point you can't work even if you retire early. And you got to save for your goals. And this is one of those things that should be clear. The whole society can't get richer by speculating on rising asset prices. There has to be the finance of something productive. The profit and investment comes from part of the new profits enabled by the production that's being financed. And so it's a win-win. The entrepreneur brings the new product to market and the investor gets interest on their savings.
Perfect. Why would a company want to borrow or lease gold? And what is the benefit to the company to do that?
So the reason why they want to do that is if they have a gold inventory, let's say it's a refiner or a jeweler, they're obliged to have, as part of operating their business, a certain amount of gold inventory at all times. If you borrow dollars to finance that inventory, let's say you borrow $1 million to finance $1 million worth of inventory. If the gold price were to drop 10%, now you have a $900,000 asset, but unfortunately you still have $1 million liability. So that mismatch creates this price risk. And by leasing the gold, you match the liability to the asset and take that price risk out, which makes it easier, simpler, safer, and lower risk to operate the business.
What are some historical leases with companies' interest rates and terms, and what can investors expect?
So historically, we've been leasing to all the bullion and jewelry related trades. We just closed the lease recently with a refiner in a country called Andorra. Andorra is one of those little micro nations in between France and Spain up in the, I think it's the Pyrenees. And there's a gold refiner there that is importing doré from Latin America, refining it, and then selling it into the European market. And so we just announced, didn't we just announce it? We're about to announce maybe tomorrow. So I'm getting slightly ahead of myself, but we announced or about to announce a lease to them to provide them the gold that they need to, to operate the refinery. Interest rate on that is what are we paying on that one? I want to say 2.5% net to the investors.
So how exactly does that work? And how did you find the connections to be able to set up and start in Andorra?
So we have been developing this concept and a brand around it, and a network of relationships globally for over a decade. And so we know people in Europe, we know people in Asia, we know people in Australia, we know people obviously in North America. And when the right opportunity comes along, and we see a lot of pitches that we take a pass on for one reason or another, but when we see a good one, we dive deeper and do due diligence. So we obviously look at the books, look at the numbers, meet the people, go on site, inspect the premises, And when we get to a point of being comfortable, then we'll initiate a lease. So what we do, we call ourselves the gold yield marketplace. So it's where companies that are seeking gold for this kind of purpose come to meet the investors who have gold, and we bring the deal to the investors. We show them a slide deck that says this is what this is all about. These are the this is the business. This is what they're doing. This is the processes. These are the risks. These are all the bad things that could happen to your gold. There is no such thing as getting a return without risk. And here's all the things we've done to mitigate those risks. Here's the controls, the monitoring, the audits, whatever. And then the investors are given an opportunity to say, how much gold do they want to put into the deal, and based on what interest rate. So an interest rate is set, the gold is raised, and then we're on to the next deal.
What type of physical gold do you accept into a project?
Any major recognized product. So if you have some little, cast, things out of a little placer in your backyard, we wouldn't necessarily deal in that. We tell people don't send us numismatic stuff. If it has real value beyond the weight of the gold, we don't know anything about that. As far as we're concerned, it's just an old junk coin that's going to go into the melt. So don't waste it on us. Bring that to a reputable dealer who knows what that's really worth. But any of the major bullion coins, any of the major recognized brands of bullion bars, we can accept all those physical products.
So 10-ounce gold bars, kilo gold bars, those okay?
Yeah, if it has a recognized hallmark on it.
Okay, and then COMEX 0 bars, so recognized. Okay, and then Swiss franc sovereigns, those would be okay as well.
Yeah, if it's produced by a European mint, absolutely, or the U.S. mint, or the Canadian mint, the Perth mint.
So this sounds great. So let's say, a customer wants to give gold to you, want to go through with doing a gold lease. What would be the exact steps if somebody was interested that they would do?
They'll come to our website. There's a form to open an account, get started with that. We have some basic minimum paperwork that the government requires us to do. Then they fund their account, and so they can either send in gold, or we can accept dollars and get them into gold that way. And then it's up to whatever the next lease is that comes along, that they can take a look at that and either participate or not. And we offer free storage in the meantime.
And the gold is stored exactly where?
So we have a network of vaults around the world. So we have a relationship with Brinks, for example. In the US, our primary partner is the Delaware Depository in Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay. So what if somebody wanted to get their gold? Is that a possibility?
Yeah.
So
redeemability in physical gold is a very important feature. We're really trying to think about the gold standard here. And, in the gold standard, you have the right to redeem. So if your gold is not on a lease, you're just in our storage program, you can redeem it at any time. If your gold is on a lease, then the lease has a contract, typically 1 year. And so when the contract is up, you have the right to take the gold and exit if that's what you want to do.
And then most of the gold leasing products, they're roughly about a year.
Yeah, typical lease contract is 1 year.
Okay. And then is there anything longer?
We also have done one gold bond so far, and plan a lot more. So a lease, what makes a lease is that the gold is physically present and the investor owns the title to that gold. So we can go on site to any of our lessees, take Lefebvre in Andorra. We could visit there. We could show up on 2 business days notice, which is what our contracts typically allow. Literally scrape all the gold, put it onto a scale, and it would weigh greater than the lease amount. A bond is absolutely a credit instrument. We are lending. That goes, so the lease does not go on the balance sheet of the lessee. It's not their property. It's like leasing a car from GM. It's their car that they let you use under certain terms in exchange for paying a lease fee, obviously. In the case of a bond, that is a credit that does go on balance sheet. So our first bond was to a gold mining company in Western Australia called Shine Resources. And so the gold is obviously sold to pay for, payroll and trucks and diesel fuel and, putting in roads and all the things that mining companies do. Then, of course, it's repaid. So in the lease, there isn't really repayment per se. It's the end of the lease if they don't want to continue or we don't want to continue. That's our gold. We just take it back. In the case of a bond, it has to be amortized. Think of borrowing money to buy a house. You don't have the cash sitting in the basement to repay it at any time. You amortize it by, earning a paycheck. And so in the case of a gold mining company, they amortize the debt by producing gold revenue, which is pulling the gold out of the ground. And that's exactly what Shine did. So the bond matured in September, and the investors were repaid the principal and interest in gold. Interest rate, the interest rate on the bond is higher. That particular bond had a 13% interest rate to the investors.
Oh, wow.
In gold. So if you put in 100 ounces, you got 113 at the end of the day.
Wow. So this is the first gold bond since 1930s?
Yeah, so before 1933, bonds were payable in gold. I gave a talk at the Harvard Club a couple of years back, and upstairs they have all these different things hanging on the walls as memorabilia. And I noticed they had an old railroad bond that the Harvard Endowment Fund had bought back in 1906 or something like that. I don't remember what year it was. Well, I took a picture of it, and man, these cameras on these phones are so good. You can just zoom in and zoom in. You can read all the fine print and everything. And it says right on there, it is payable in the standard, gold coin at that time. Nobody wanted to be repaid a debt in banknotes, which is itself a form of debt. They wanted gold. So, up until 1933, a bond was payable in gold. That's how it worked. 1933, Roosevelt, I'm sure infamous in, the gold community amongst your customer base, made gold illegal. That's the famous part. But he also broke all of the gold clauses, including bonds and everything else, and said, okay, well, now instead of being, so that particular railroad bond was $5,000. Well, at a dollar was a 20th of an ounce of gold, roughly, not exactly, but roughly. So that's 250 ounces of gold. After 1933, that's 5,000 now fiat dollars, which of course they revalued in terms of gold, and Nixon, completely broke it. That bond matured in 1998, I think it was. It's like a 92-year bond. So after 1933, Harvard, instead of getting paid interest in gold, is now getting paid, these paper dollars of declining value and questionable provenance. And then in the end, they get back a nominal $5,000, principal back in 1998. But of course, that was not a return of the capital of 250 ounces of gold that they put up in 1906. So FDR inflicted huge losses on anybody that trusted that. So anyways, that's what a bond was. After 1933, he said, no mas, we're not going to allow this anymore. And then gold remained illegal, as in a felony, as in go to prison for possessing it, like today, possessing funny white powder, go to prison. 1971, Nixon ends the last link to gold. By 1975, Congress said, well, gold doesn't matter anymore. We don't care anymore. It's nothing to do with the banking system, nothing to do with the monetary system. Well, whatever, we'll re-legalize it. Let's let it trade like frozen orange juice and pork bellies. And so that's what they did. But by that point, the idea of financing a productive enterprise in gold had been long dead. From 1933 to 1975, 42 years, it's done, stick a fork in it. So since then, gold is traded as a volatile commodity. We've come along and done this bond, the first proper, principal denominated in gold, with interest, principal and interest repaid in gold since 1933, which is the first bond since 87 years.
Incredible. So with Monetary Metals being the only one that has been able to issue a gold bond, what other, characteristic would you say that makes Monetary Metals different in the marketplace versus everything out there?
Just our focus on financing productive enterprise. At the end of the day, every bit of food we eat, the computers we use for video calls like this, all the equipment in the internet, the cars we drive, everything has to be financed. Production is capital intensive. If you want efficient, large scale production, if you want to just be a little subsistence tribe, living on the edge of a river delta and pulling fish out of the river, doesn't really require a lot of capital. But the way we operate today is very capital intensive. It all requires finance, which means on one side of the trade, you have investors putting up capital with the expectation of a return and all the due protections, the security with the collateral and everything else, plus obviously extensive due diligence. And the other side of the trade, you have a productive business who's producing something that the market wants, and you need the financing. And so it's kind of ironic that banking regulation has become so perverse that this would be recognized as a very simple banking enterprise, 200 years ago, 150 years ago. And today, it's not recognized as banking at all. Gold isn't treated as money. Gold is a commodity. You call it a lease. In the regulatorium, we create these words with these agonizing, hair-splitting, angels dancing on the head of a pin definitions. And on one side of the definition, you're free to operate. On the other side of the definition, shut you down and go to jail or pay a fine or whatever. And banking is one of those things. You can't say the word bank. That's a protected category. That is a license and a charter and government supervision and all those things. So we're not a bank, but in a certain sense, it's a very simple and very old business model, which is a bunch of people have gold. No one of them have enough to finance any one venture, nor would they want to put it all, they want to diversify the risk anyway. And no one of them either has the sophistication or the time and the energy to do the due diligence. On the other side are businesses that need capital. You're bringing two parties together, very simple business. The difference is we've made gold relevant again, and we're doing it in gold and silver too, versus dollars, which is what the world is operating on today.
So gold being relevant, do you have any thoughts going into 2022 of what the market might do?
I think gold's more relevant than ever because, let alone all the monetary and fiscal problems we had prior to COVID. In COVID, what did they do? Well, they first increased the amount of spending by, breathtaking amounts, the stupefying amounts of spending were unleashed post-COVID, and that hasn't really stopped. So whereas previously, the government was running at about $1 trillion a year deficit, they claim a lower number, and there's some accounting gimmick that I haven't figured out yet. But if there's a Treasury Department website called Debt to the Penny that tells you can look at any 2 days and you can see what the change in the debt was. And if you look at 2 dates a year apart, even back before COVID, it was going up at over $1 trillion a year. Post-COVID, obviously a much bigger number. At the same time, the interest rate is lower. And now, the interest rate is correcting at the moment, one of many, many corrections along the way. It's been a falling trend since 1981. And the drivers of that trend are still in full force. So at the same time, so for all of the so-called rising interest rates we have now, the interest rate has risen below the pre-COVID low. So before COVID, it was 1.8, 1.9% on a 10-year Treasury bond. Then it fell to 0.5%, and now it's back up to 1.7%. So, like all these things in our economy, it's like dropping a little rubber ball. It bounces, but never quite re-attains the height from which it was dropped originally. So the return to finance the government is lower than ever, and the risk of financing the government is much higher than it was. So of course people turn to gold. Gold is the one financial asset that isn't somebody else's liability. If you own a piece of metal, that's it, full stop. You own $1, that's a thin slice of the government's debt. And, why would you why would you want to do that? And a lot of people increasingly asking that question.
So do you think gold all-time high this year?
So we put out a gold outlook report every year at the end of January, and I have a little bit more analysis to do. So I'm going to hold off on that comment until I have a chance to do that.
Perfect.
But
And
I
then-
certainly see a different character to the gold market post-COVID versus pre-COVID. So not only do we have a higher price today, but it trades differently than it did before. And so I don't see a return. I mean, I see there's some bank or another just put out a call. It's going to go to 1,300. I don't see any reason for that to happen. But it could hit 2,300, right? So the upside or the volatility risk is more to the upside than to the downside from where we sit today.
Perfectly put. Any final thoughts?
Trying to think if there's anything I didn't cover. People should want to get a return on their money. Gold is money, and that's what Monetary Metals is about.
Perfectly stated. Thank you so much, Keith. Appreciate your
Thank you,
time.
Dave. Thank you.
All right, make the most of your day. Enjoy.
All right, take care.